Deep within Motown's success era lies a secret that haunted the Supremes. For decades, fans only saw the sparkle, never the shadows. Now the mystery has finally been uncovered, and it isn't good. Join us as we find out what really happened all those years. The Supremes' reign. The Supremes were more than just a successful Motown group. They became a powerful force that reshaped how people saw African Americans during the years of the Civil Rights Movement. Their style was carefully polished, and their sound carried the mark of sophistication. When they stepped onto the stage in shimmering gowns and carried themselves with elegance, they represented a new image of success. Their polished pop soul sound helped the group to cross into audiences that had not been reached before. Through their music and image, they brought racial integration into the homes of young people who watched them in magazines, on television, and in sold-out venues. Teenagers followed their every move, seeing them not only as stars, but also as symbols of change. They went from dominating the charts to appearing on national shows and headlining glamorous stages in Las Vegas, all while shaping how the country viewed race and success. Their beginning wasn't glamorous. The story started in Detroit, in the Brewster housing projects, where a group of working-class girls came together to form a singing act. They first called themselves the Primettes, a name that tied them to another group, the Primes. Among those first members were Florence Ballard, Diana Ross, Mary Wilson, Barbara Martin, and Betty McGlown. After some changes, the core became Ballard, Ross, and Wilson, with Martin leaving before their fame truly began. They took their first steps into the music industry with a small label, Lupine Records, but soon found their way to Motown. Founded by Berry Gordy, they waited patiently on the lawn outside the headquarters, hoping for a chance to get inside. Their determination worked when a producer rushed out, looking for voices to add hand claps and background parts. The group seized the moment, and that small break became their doorway to opportunity. In 1960, they signed with the label, and by 1961, they had changed their name to the Supremes. The new name carried a stronger sense of power and confidence, but success did not come easily. For several years, they struggled to find their place. Gordy tried different producers and material, hoping to discover the right formula that would set them apart. During this time, the group learned how to refine their sound and appearance, but they still had no hits on the chart. Everything shifted in 1964 when Holland Dozier Holland took charge of their sound, creating something fresh and modern. The result was smooth and stylish, fitting neatly into radio playlists across the country. That year, the Supremes scored their first #1 hit with Where Did Our Love Go?, which was followed by more chart toppers. The songs carried a mix of sweetness and sophistication that appealed both to teenagers and to adults, reaching into homes and hearts across racial lines. From that moment forward, the Supremes became unstoppable. Between 1964 and 1965, they had 5 consecutive #1 hits in the United States, a record-breaking run that made them stand out as one of Motown's biggest acts. Each success built their reputation higher, and audiences began to expect brilliance whenever they stepped on stage. The group had finally discovered what made them unforgettable. As their fame grew, recognition followed. In 1964, Baby Love earned them a Grammy nomination for Best Rhythm and Blues Recording, proving that their artistry had reached beyond just popularity. The following year, Stop, In the Name of Love, brought another nomination, this time for Best Group Contemporary Performance. Awards and honors began to pile up, cementing their place in the music industry. Over their career, the Supremes achieved 12 #1 hits, ranking them just behind the Beatles as the most successful group on the Billboard Hot 100. This accomplishment placed them among the greatest of their time, showing how far they had come from the housing projects where they started. Every hit they recorded pushed them further into history, and each performance added to their reputation as trailblazers. Their journey was not only about music, it was also about breaking barriers. At a time when the country was deeply divided, the Supremes stepped onto television screens and stages that had rarely been open to African American performers. Their elegance and charm made audiences embrace them, while their music carried across boundaries that once seemed impossible to cross. They helped change how people thought about race and talent in America, using style and sound as tools of influence. But things soon went bad. Building breakages. The Supremes had already reached a level of success that very few groups could touch. By the time Diana Ross stepped off the stage for the last time with them in January of 1970, the group had stacked up 12 #1 singles. That record placed them firmly in the history of popular music. But once Ross walked away, the entire weight of the group fell on Mary Wilson. She suddenly had to hold things together, even though the ground beneath her seemed to be shifting. Cindy Birdsong had taken Florence Ballard's place, but she was still finding her way and had not fully settled into her role. Mary felt unsure at first, but she pushed herself to hold on. She leaned on her love for performing and made up her mind not to give in. She reached out for help, and with Berry Gordy guiding things, Jean Terrell was brought into the group. With this fresh voice, the Supremes recorded new songs, showing that the group still had the power to move forward. But change never stopped following them. Birdsong stepped away, and Linda Lawrence took her spot. For a little while, it looked like things had settled. Yet before long, Terrell and Lawrence both walked off, leaving Wilson once again to pick up the pieces. At that moment, she realized that the first dream she had shared with Florence and Diana would never return in the same way. Still, she refused to let the name of the Supremes fade. She wanted the group to step down with strength rather than fall apart. Wilson began to search around for new voices. She looked inside Motown and weighed her options. Sarita Wright was at one point considered, and Lamont Dozier suggested Sherry Payne, the younger sister of Freda Payne. Wilson trusted Freda and knew her well, so when Sherry came from Detroit to Los Angeles, she was ready to listen. The moment Wilson heard her sing and saw her personality shine, she felt that this was the right move. Sherry's presence seemed to breathe new life into the Supremes. To make the trio complete, Wilson called Cindy Birdsong once more and asked her to return. Birdsong agreed, and soon, Wilson, Payne, and Birdsong stood together as the new Supremes. They recorded an album that carried only the group's name, showing that they were ready to start another chapter. Each stage of the group's life carried a different identity. With Diana, the spirit of friendship and ambition pushed them forward. When the name shifted to Diana Ross and the Supremes, glamour and polish defined their style. When Jean Terrell stepped in, her voice and natural beauty reflected the early 70s and matched the energy of the Black is Beautiful movement. The trio of Jean, Cindy, and Mary blended with ease, and Wilson often looked back at that lineup as one of the smoothest and most balanced the group ever had. Even with such moments of balance, obstacles appeared. In 1975, the Supremes faced pressure over whether to perform in South Africa during the painful years of apartheid. Many objected to the idea. Inside the group, strong feelings clashed. Sherry and Cindy opposed the trip, while Wilson felt differently. This disagreement created tension, but outside of that issue, the three women managed to carry on and work together with respect. Still, the changes refused to stop. Cindy announced once again that she was leaving, and Wilson felt the heavy weight of starting over. She had carried the responsibility of holding the Supremes up through all the years of shifting members, and now she was forced to begin again. Yet she saw a chance to work with the Holland brothers, and that opportunity gave her the strength to press on. This time, Susay Green joined the group. Green already had a strong reputation, not only as a singer, but also as a songwriter. She had worked alongside Stevie Wonder and had proven her talent. Wilson brought her in, seeing her as the right fit for the moment. Through all of these changes, the Supremes kept moving. Wilson stood as the anchor through it all, picking up the pieces whenever someone left, and holding the name of the Supremes steady. However, there's a reason why Diana Ross left. A painful asunder. In 1967, Berry Gordy made a choice that would change the Supremes forever. At that time, the group was already the crown jewel of Motown, loved across the country and beyond. Diana Ross, Mary Wilson, and Florence Ballard stood together as a trio that had worked its way up from Detroit to international fame. But Gordy wanted more than music success. He wanted the group to cross into Hollywood, and he believed Diana Ross was the one who could take Motown into movies and television. To make that happen, he rebranded the act as Diana Ross and the Supremes. The announcement was made at the Central Plaza Hotel in Los Angeles, showing that this was not just a new label, but a new path. The shift did not stop with the name. Florence Ballard, one of the original voices who had built the group, was soon pushed out and replaced by Cindy Birdsong. It was clear that Gordy's plan placed Diana Ross firmly at the center, leaving the others to stand behind her. The finishing school Motown had created had already trained the women to appear polished, elegant, and refined. Yet Gordy's hand shaped Ross differently. He pushed her into the light, giving her every chance to shine, while Mary and Flo had to accept their smaller roles. Meanwhile, Diana Ross had always carried herself as someone who wanted to stand out. She often moved toward the front, and those around her noticed how she reached for recognition. The very moment Gordy placed his full support behind her, there was no longer any real space for the others to compete. His personal connection with her only added to her advantage. Their relationship, which blended business with something more private, tilted the balance inside the group and made Ross untouchable in a way. Unfortunately, as the Supremes climbed higher on the charts, the tensions underneath grew stronger. Ross wanted more control, more room, and more attention. Whenever she was unhappy, she could go straight to Gordy, and often things would be rearranged to fit her wishes. This left Mary Wilson and Florence Ballard struggling to adapt. The group's success pulled Ross upward like a rising star, but the same force kept pressing her partners downward. By 1970, it became clear that the group could not continue as it once had. That year marked the end of the Supremes' initial lineup. Soon after, Ross stepped into a new role on her own. In 1971, she starred in her own television special under Motown Productions, beginning the journey of a solo career that Gordy had been preparing her for all along. She had moved out of the trio's shadow and into her own spotlight. For her, the early 1970s was a complete separation from her beginnings. The group had given her a platform, but Gordy's guidance built her new identity as a star in her own right. Her solo career only grew stronger through the years. In 1981, Ross signed a massive contract with RCA Records. The deal was one of the biggest of its time and showed how far she had come since her early days with the Supremes. The irony was that RCA later bought out Motown, which tied her story back to Gordy once again, though in a very different way. By 2000, thoughts of a reunion brought Ross back to her roots. Plans were drawn up for a tour with Mary Wilson and Cindy Birdsong. At first, it looked like a dream for fans, but problems quickly appeared. Promoters offered Ross $15 million to perform, while Wilson was offered only $4 million and Birdsong less than $1 million. Ross tried to step in by offering to double what the others had been promised. Birdsong accepted, but Wilson would not agree. Without her, the deal collapsed. The tour still went on, but instead of Wilson and Birdsong, Ross was joined by Linda Lawrence and Sherry Payne. The problem was that neither of them had ever shared the stage with Ross during the group's peak, and neither had sung on the original records. Another former member, Suze Green, was asked but turned the chance down. Critics attacked the idea, and fans were upset not only by the missing members, but also by the high ticket prices. After only half the scheduled dates, the tour was canceled. The Supremes' story shows how success can shift and divide those who once stood side by side. Each woman carried her own journey after leaving the group, but the choices made in the late 1960s shaped everything that came after. The rise and fall of the Supremes stayed tied to Motown's history, a reminder of how ambition, power, and change can pull people together and tear them apart. But there's one very important part of their journey: the burden bearer. Mary Wilson carried far more weight in the Supremes than most people ever understood. While the world saw the glamour, the lights, and the polished shows, she worked hard behind the scenes to keep everything moving. She brought in new singers when others left, taught them how to hold themselves on stage, and made sure they came together as a real group. She paid for instruments when money was tight, found ways to cover travel costs, and chased down producers so that their music would be recorded. She also kept following up with Motown to make sure projects did not fade away. The work never seemed to end, yet much of it stayed hidden from the public. Without her steady hand, the Supremes would not have lasted nearly as long as they did. Years later, when she looked back, she admitted that the group should have stopped before reaching the High Energy album. By then, the ties that once held them together had started to weaken, and the spirit that kept them strong had worn thin. Still, she pressed on, hoping that a chance to work again with Holland Dozier Holland might give her new direction. Performing kept her going, but at the same time, she searched for a way out. She wanted to hold on to the stage, Yet she was unsure about striking out on her own. Each time another member walked away, she doubted whether she had the strength to carry a career alone. The thought grew heavier with every lineup change until her husband finally urged her to step back and let the group come to an end. Life after the Supremes brought more struggles than she expected. She often joked that she should have married a lawyer because court cases seemed to follow her at every turn. The first major fight began when she tried to claim control over the Supremes' name. For years, she and the others believed it belonged to them, especially in the days before Florence Ballard left. But hidden in the fine print of the contracts was a truth that stunned her. Motown owned the name. That discovery left the door wide open for other groups to pop up and tour under the Supremes banner, even though they had no true connection to the original lineup. It was painful to watch strangers use the name she had worked so hard to build. Soon she saw that this problem stretched beyond her group. Acts like the Drifters and the Coasters faced the same battle. Bands that had poured their hearts into building their names were being copied by imposters who toured for money under those stolen titles. Mary Wilson and others refused to sit back and accept it. They fought to change the system, and their voices reached Capitol Hill. Out of that fight came the Truth in Music law, passed in more than 30 states. This law gave protection to groups by stopping others from stealing names that had been earned through years of hard work. For Wilson, the fight was never just about herself. It was about protecting an entire industry and the artists who had carried it forward. Her determination only grew stronger as time went on. She pushed for another change in the law, one that reached even further. This was the Music Modernization Act, a bill meant to protect artists whose songs had been recorded before 1972. For decades, musicians who had shaped modern music with timeless hits before that year received nothing when their songs were streamed on digital platforms. While younger artists collected royalties, the pioneers of earlier decades were left out. Wilson stood firmly behind this effort, knowing how unfair the system had been. She understood how much these musicians had given and how badly they deserved to be paid for their creations. At last, the act passed, giving older recordings the same recognition as newer ones. It meant that the singers and musicians who had carried music forward before 1972 could finally receive what they were owed whenever their songs reached new listeners online. Wilson felt proud of her role in pushing it through, even though the news of its passing barely made headlines. On the day the president signed it, attention shifted elsewhere, but the importance of the law itself remained strong. Her journey had never been just about the stage. It showed the heavy load she carried both in performance and in the fight for fairness. She had been more than a singer. She was a leader who trained others, kept her group alive, and later stood up for those who deserved better treatment. After the end, Diana Ross moved into a new chapter after leaving the group, and her rise as a solo star was supported by Berry Gordy, who continued to guide her career. He financed major films that kept her at the center of attention through the 1970s. In 1972, she played the lead role in Lady Sings the Blues, which was followed by Mahogany in 1975 and The Wiz in 1978. Each of these films came with a soundtrack album, and together they helped her stay in the spotlight. Ross built her image not only as a singer, but also as an actress, and the projects kept her name alive throughout the decade. Towards the end of the 1970s, she worked with top producers like Nicholas Ashford and Valerie Simpson, who shaped her 1979 album The Boss, and with Nile Rodgers and Bernard Edwards of Chic, who produced her 1980 album Diana. Both records turned into commercial successes. Even with these achievements, her focus later shifted abroad. Aside from her Central Park concert in New York City in 1983, which drew heavy attention for many reasons, and a few appearances on American television, Ross gradually began to turn her energy toward building a global audience. Through the 1980s and 1990s, she built up a loyal following outside the United States that often proved stronger than her support at home. Mary Wilson also stepped out on her own, though her path looked very different. She recorded solo albums and released singles, but her most lasting mark came through her writing. In 1986, she released her memoir, Dream Girl: My Life as a Supreme, which quickly became a bestseller. The book gave readers a close look into her years with the Supremes, and it kept her connected with the public long after the group had ended. Many years later, she teamed up with Mark Bago to write Supreme Glamour, The Inside Story of the Original Pop Fashionistas in 2019. This work celebrated the style and fashion of the Supremes, showing how their look influenced generations. Wilson used these projects to keep her story alive and to remind people of the cultural impact the group carried. Cindy Birdsong, on the other hand, stepped back from the entertainment world almost completely after the Supremes broke apart. She tried to start a solo career in the 1980s, but it did not take off. Her name faded from the charts and she chose to live largely away from the stage. Florence Ballard faced the hardest road of all. After being removed from the group in 1967, she tried to build a solo career but struggled to gain any ground. Despite her talent, success never came her way. Later, some began to rediscover her as a vocalist, and there was hope she could make her way back. But in 1976, at the young age of 32, her life came to a sudden end when she had a heart attack. Her story became one of the most tragic parts of the Supremes' legacy. The influence of the Supremes reached into fiction as well. In 1976, the film Sparkle appeared, telling the story of a trio from Harlem that closely resembled the group's journey. The score was written by Curtis Mayfield, and the soundtrack sung by Aretha Franklin became a major success. Decades later, a remake was planned with Aaliyah as the lead, but the project stopped after her demise in 2001. Eventually, the new version came out in 2012. Their story also inspired Broadway. On December 21, 1981, the musical Dreamgirls opened at the Imperial Theater. It went on to run for over 1,500 performances. The show told the tale of the Dreams, a fictional trio whose journey closely followed that of the Supremes. Characters in the musical mirrored real figures from the group's history, with Effie White standing in for Florence Ballard. The songs blended the sound of Motown with Broadway, creating a fresh mix that drew large audiences, while Mary Wilson embraced the play and loved how it brought attention to their history. Diana Ross reportedly reacted with anger and chose to stay away from it. The legacies of Ross, Wilson, Birdsong, and Ballard unfolded in very different directions, but each path showed how much the Supremes had shaped not only music, but also fashion, film, and theater. Even after the group was gone, their story kept being told and reshaped in new forms across the decades.